What is up, everyone? Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how I restored this Art Deco dresser back to close to original condition. I knew right away when I saw this that this wood grain was a faux paint job, and I really wanted to know what was under this paint. You're not going to want to miss this reveal. Stay tuned. Diving right in with some clean strip premium stripper, my gloves, scraper, respirator, and some mineral spirits for cleanup. So backstory on this, I'm tackling it for a challenge. Lisa at Ivy Lane Home is hosting this challenge with a bunch of other amazing, talented furniture artists, and we are working on a piece in the theme of Art Deco, so that is why I chose this piece. And once all of the pieces are done, and we have a playlist of other folks who competed in the challenge who have some YouTube videos up, I will link that in the description so you can check them out. And I'm going to do something a little different than my previous videos with this one. I'm going to let the work and the sounds of working speak for themselves and let you enjoy this without much talking or music. So let me know how you feel about this, if you prefer this better than a full narration and background music. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that. So without anything further, enjoy the video. Before I show you the end result, I wanted to remind you of where we started with this fake faux paint job and a few nicks and scratches here and there. But after revealing the original veneer and cleaning it up, this is where we ended up. I am really happy with how it turned out, and I think it looks really good. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you think I did a good job, I hope you will consider liking and subscribing. And as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. What is up, everyone? I'm Jeremy, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to take you through the process of restoring this vintage maple buffet. So let's see what's under this blue paint. I picked this piece up on Facebook Marketplace for free, and when I got it home, I could tell it had been stored in someone's garage or basement for quite a while. So first things first was to give it a nice vacuum to get rid of all of these spider webs and spider eggs. The main thing that sparked my curiosity with this piece was the paint, so I was really curious as to what was underneath it. So after vacuuming, I went straight in with my stripper to get a look at the wood that was underneath. I'm using Clean Strip Premium Stripper here, just applying it liberally with my chip brush and then coming back into areas where it was starting to dry out and then letting it do its work. As you can see, after just a couple minutes, it's starting to melt right away. I was kind of expecting it to be more bubbly and dry, but as you can see, it just kind of melted down into this liquid mess, which I haven't really experienced before with paint, so I'm not really sure what type of paint this was. I'm not really a fan of this detail on the back edge of the top, so I am going to try and remove it using my 5-in-1 tool and a hammer. I had assumed that it was probably attached with some nails and glue, but it was really giving me a hard time trying to pry this up. And that's when I noticed these little wood caps were hiding the screws that were attaching it to the top. So I realized that's why I couldn't pry it up. So as I'm trying here just to get the screws out, they were a little bit hard to remove, but I ended up getting them out. After getting a good look at everything inside and out, I have realized that this buffet is made of solid wood. So I'm coming in with my sander to get rid of any of the remaining paint and existing finish that is left on the top. I will go through a couple of grits here, starting at 120 and then 180, and then I will smooth out everything with 220 before I move on to finishing with stain. Since the paint was so messy to remove and liquidy with the stripper, I wanted to see how easily I could get the paint off by just sanding, now that I know that everything is solid wood. And I think that this is the route that I'm going to take for the rest of the buffet. After getting a good look at the wood grain, I'm fairly sure this is maple. That's what Google told me. And also, it seems like this rounded edge sort of look is common with maple. And so that's what I'm going with. And I can imagine you're shocked, but I am not going to be reusing this hardware. To remove the paint, I'm going to start with an 80 grit and then move up to 120, then 180, and finish with 220 before stain. Periodically while sanding, I do just check my sanding disc to make sure that there's no buildup on there, because if I do get any of that, that can cause sanding swirls, which I don't want. And so if I notice anything building up on there, I'll either try to get it off or switch out to a new sanding disc. I want to make sure to get the sides and the under areas where the wood slides across itself to just help with the sliding of the drawers. For the rounded edges of the different parts of the buffet, I am using my Surf Prep sander with the squishy pad to make sure that I don't flatten out any of those areas. My vision for this piece is to be more sort of clean lines, so I'm not really a fan of this kind of country cottage style trim here at the bottom, so I'm gonna take this off and then figure out something to replace it with later on. Next, I'm going to dive into really just focusing on getting the paint off the entire piece so that I can move on to finishing. So same process, using a rougher grit to really get that paint off, and then going in with finer grits to smooth out the surface in prep for stain and finish. For hard to reach areas, I'm gonna come in with my carbide scraper to remove the paint. So for this instance, I am using it here under the top edge. And on parts again that have this more rounded edge, I'm coming in with my Surf Prep sander with the squishy pad to make sure that I keep the profile of that edge. For detailed areas like this here on the leg, I am using some lacquer thinner. You could also use acetone, and it does a good job at getting the paint off. So in conjunction with a wire brush, and then coming in back with my sander just to smooth out any of those scratches that came in from the brush, and that will get those off. Now that I've got the paint taken off the entire piece, I will come back with higher grits in progression of 180 and 220 to smooth out everything and get it ready for this stain. To camouflage these nails that are now visible after taking off that back trim, I'm just gonna tap them below the surface and then fill them with some wood filler. There was a nail under the surface here that was pushed sideways and it was causing the wood to crack, so before repairing this, I'm just gonna remove this nail. For the wood filler, I'm going to try something I've never done before. What I've seen other people do is use some glue and sawdust to create your own wood filler, and then I'll use that to fill in this crack and then also some of the nail holes that I pushed below. I'm just experimenting here, trying to get the right ratio to get the perfect wood filler consistency. To replace the front trim that I removed, I'm going to repurpose the piece that I took from the top and just flip that over and use the flat side. That way it'll be the same type of wood, so it'll match and it'll be a nice simple trim to put in the front. Next, to make sure it's the right width for the front, I'm just going to use the piece that I removed to mark where I need to cut so that it's the perfect size. I do want to make sure that when I cut, though, I'm going to cut on the outside of that line. That way I make sure not to get too short, and I can always use my sander just to fine tune any fit issues that arise. And as expected, it's just a hair too wide. So I'm gonna, like I said, use my sander to just shave off a little bit so that it will fit nice and snug. Now time for stain. I'm going to use the General Finishes dye stain in the color dark brown. This is a water-based dye stain, so I've used it before for toning to darken some polyurethane, but I've never just done it straight onto wood before, so this is kind of a learning experience for me. So what I found out here as I'm putting it on, that it is drying super fast. So what I realized is I need to just be more quick and more liberal with the stain, and so that's kind of where I go next. I just use the paper towel, get it nice and saturated, and then just quickly get it on the whole piece. What I did also notice is that as it sits for a second, it really soaks in and then blends with itself. So at first I was a little worried about some of these streaking marks, but once it sat there for a minute, it kind of really just blended into itself nicely. I thought it would be nice to just clean up the back as well. So the back piece that I had removed, I'm just going to quickly do a sand on both sides and then give it a coat of stain to match the rest of the piece. It's hard to see, but there were some numbers stamped on the back there in the top left area that I left unsanded. Thought it would be nice just to preserve that, but otherwise I'm just cleaning up the rest with the sander. Getting close to the finish line, so before I protect this with some poly, I am going to do a quick sand with a high grit sandpaper. The dye stain did raise the grain just a tad, so just want to have a nice smooth surface before applying the poly. I'm going to be using the Minwax oil modified polyurethane in satin, and of course I will be straining this before spraying through my Wagner sprayer. With poly, which is usually pretty thin, I like to dial down the material flow on my sprayer and increase the air pressure. This will just really vaporize that material and give a nice fine mist to spray on the piece, and I am overlapping my passes by about 50% just to get nice coverage, and I will do a few coats of this to ensure a nice durable finish on the piece. To ensure a nice smooth final result, I will use a high grit sanding sponge in between coats of poly to knock back any bumps or texture or dust nibs that would have landed in there while it was drying. I'm going to reuse these hinges, but they didn't come very clean after scrubbing with some Barkeeper's Friend, so I am going to go ahead and give them a refresh with some antique gold rub and buff. This will match nicely with the hardware that I bought that you'll see has a sort of an antique vibe to it as well, so it should go pretty well. And we are crossing the finish line here. Next, I will put everything back together, and then we will see the final reveal. You're also getting a little preview here of these ring poles that I got for the replacement to the moon and stars. So I think these fit the new aesthetic just a bit better. When reattaching doors, I like to put the screw in the top hinge and a screw in the bottom hinge just quickly by hand. That will hold them in place, and then I can go ahead and come in with my drill and screw them in the rest of the way. That way the door is nice and secure to put in the remaining screws. This colorful, playful piece had a lot of potential, and I knew there was a classic beauty hiding underneath. This buffet was already at least on its second life, and I'm so excited to send it off into the world for its third. I hope you enjoyed this makeover. Let me know in the comments what you thought. If you liked it, please hit that like button, and if you're not already, please consider subscribing. And I have more projects coming, so I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you, and see you next time. What is up, everyone? Welcome back. Sometimes the most incredible pieces are hiding in plain sight. I saw this on Facebook Marketplace, and I'm willing to bet that most people scrolled right by once they saw the missing veneer and missing edge banding. But when I saw those Burlwood drawer fronts, I knew this piece needed to be saved and had amazing potential. So stick around to see exactly how I brought this guy back to life. Thanks for joining me again for another project. And as I start out all my projects, I'm going to begin by removing the hardware. I like to save the screws by placing them into the knob, and then I will collect all of these in a box or a bag for safekeeping so that they don't get lost. One of the things that was noted in the listing was that the drawers, some of them weren't working very well, and I'm sure that that was something that also deterred other buyers, but I knew that once I got it home I could take a look and probably figure out what was going on pretty easily and make a adjustment or a correction in some way to make it work. And I was right. The only thing that was wrong was that this drawer slide was not attached in the back, and the rest of them were just fine. And I'll show you how I fixed that later in the video. As I was getting ready for sanding, I was taking a look at these Burlwood drawers, and they have these little accent strips of wood, and I wanted to remove them for ease of sanding so that I wouldn't have to go around them. So I was carefully just trying out to see how easily these would come out. I'm just gently tapping with a hammer and my 5-in-1 tool to try to pry these out. And as I was doing that, I realized that I made a mistake. I snapped the wood off. Yep, completely broken. And so here I am trying to figure out what to do next. And that was not coming out, so I'm just gonna put this back where I found it and glue that back later. Next, I'm gonna move on to cleaning the piece completely. I'm using a 50-50 mixture of denatured alcohol and water. I like this mixture. It gets rid of all the dust, any grime, grease, or anything that's built up on the surface over the years. This is also where you can get a chance to look over your piece closer. So I'm noticing, obviously there's some missing edge banding there in the front, but I'm seeing a little bit of a dry, crackling, sort of failing finish. So I'll be addressing that, and then also some kind of sticker residue. So I'm just putting a little bit more of my cleaning mixture here, letting that sit for a second, and I'll use a scraper to try and get that off. I like to make sure that I get not only the outside clean, but also the inside. It's pretty rare that people remove their drawers to clean under and behind them. So after 50 years or so of dust collection, I think a good clean is definitely in order. As I was cleaning, I noticed some loose edge banding. So this happened on both sides of that loose drawer. Imagine that the loose drawer was rubbing against the edge of the dresser here over time and then just made this come loose. So I am going to apply some wood glue underneath with a syringe. I think I'm using Type Bond 2. I want to apply a generous amount and then kind of squeeze out any excess and wipe that away before clamping. I'm also going to use some painter's tape so that the glue here doesn't stick to the block that I'm going to use to clamp this down. Alright, the next step is to remove the old finish. I'm choosing to do that with sanding. I'm going to start with a 120 grit. And as you can see, I was having some kind of trouble with my sander, so I'm switching back to one of my older ones. This is my Black & Decker orbital sander, and we'll see how this one goes. Going fairly slowly and using light pressure, I'm going to sand back and forth until I get down to raw wood with the 120 grit. Once that is complete, I'm going to remove all the sanding dust and then move on to a higher grit of 180 before moving on. I'm just using a very slightly damp with water lint-free cloth to remove the sanding dust. I know a lot of people like to use tack cloths. I've heard that whatever it is that makes them sticky can interfere with your finish, so I tend to stay away from those and just use damp cloth. This process does take a little bit of time, but I like to listen to an audiobook or a podcast and just kind of zen out while I do it. I like to go as high on the grit as I can at the beginning, just because I don't want to use anything too coarse and risk damaging the wood, or with this veneer busting through to the substrate beneath. And then again, light pressure and going fairly slow and working your way up to a higher grit will ensure that you don't get any sanding swirls or scratches in the wood. I want to take off the base just for ease of sanding, and so I flipped over the dresser, just taking a look here. It looks like it's just screwed on, so I'm going to start by removing the screws and see how that goes. After the screws came out, there was still some resistance, so I'm assuming there's probably a little bit of wood glue, so I'm just gonna grab my 5-in-1 tool and my hammer and gently pry the base off. Next, I'm just giving the drawers a wipe down before sanding, and I'm trying to think of the best way to approach sanding these with the brass accent that's attached, so you'll see how I approach that in a little bit. Again, I'm starting with a 120 grit on the drawers for sanding, and I'm just going to sand on these top two drawers with the burlwood and the vertical wood accents. I'm just going to sand the middle of the squares and then come back to do some hand sanding in the areas around the wood strips. And just giving a wipe down after sanding here to get a look at how this burlwood is going to look once I put the finish on, and it looks pretty good. I'm always amazed at how this finish, it darkens and ambers over time, and it just really obscures the veneer patterns. So this is one of my favorite parts, to reveal that wood pattern and be able to showcase it with the finish that I choose. And I got a new sander. Something was just off with that Black & Decker, which is why I don't use it anymore anyway. And so after taking a look at the sander that was breaking the DeWalt, I realized that the belt was broken. So I ordered some new ones, and in the meantime I went and grabbed a sander to use so I could continue this project. And this sander actually was working really well. It's Rigid brand. I had never really heard of it. It's from Lowe's, and it fits the vacuum hose perfectly, and it just runs really smooth and does a great job. It also has a adjustable speed, so that was also nice. And I never learn, but I'm trying to remove these brass accents for ease of sanding. So one of these was already coming loose, so I thought, I'd check it out to see how easily I could get these out. And same process that I was trying with the little wood strips, trying to pry that out with my 5-in-1 tool, and luckily this came out great. So moving on to the other side, and we'll see how that goes. You can't see it, but it snapped. So I just hammered that back in, and I'll fix it with a little bit of glue, and I'll just do some hand sanding around the edges, and no big deal. So when I'm hand sanding, I notice that when the dust starts to build up, the sanding becomes less effective. It's almost like the dust that's building up is kind of like little ball bearings, and it's like not allowing me to actually sand anymore. So even though I feel like I'm doing something, so I just like to keep my vacuum handy and get rid of that dust as I go, and that really helps to speed up the sanding process. Get a better sand on these little wood details, I'm just going to use these little sanding blocks that have different profiles. So this one fit over these perfectly, and then it allowed me to get a nice clean sand around all the edges and over the curve. I decided to hand sand the edge banding around the front of the dresser, just so that I made sure that I didn't kind of rip it off or bust through it with my electrical sander. And then, of course, also getting into the little details with my hand sander was allowing me to get a nice clean sand over these little edges that are kind of hard to get to, especially with a round orbital sander. Now that we are down to raw wood, I'm going to move up to a 180 grit sandpaper and slowly refine the scratch pattern to get a nice smooth surface for the next step. was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, so I'm just rubbing some mineral spirits on the wood here to see if I was to seal it now, what would it look like. And I have to say, I think it looks excellent. So I think I'm gonna skip any staining and just move forward with a seal. And you can see there on the top left of the screen, right to left, I did burn through the veneer when I was doing sanding with an electrical sander there, so I'll show you how I try and repair that. And now that all the sanding is complete, I'm just using the mineral spirits to get a look at the veneer on all the drawers, and then this is also helping me to get rid of all the sanding dust. And next, I'll switch gears to sand the base. And unfortunately, I burned through the veneer on the edge of this base piece, so I'm gonna try and camouflage it with furniture markers. So I started to do that, and then I realized that I need to check what the color is going to be once it's finished. So I'm just rubbing a little bit of mineral spirits on here to get sort of a look at how that will be so I can match it better. So I'm just using a couple of different colors of markers here to try and blend that in and then mimic the wood grain. And I attempted to do the same thing on this edge banding. Taking a look at the legs, I'm not gonna strip these down all the way. I'm just gonna do a quick scuff sand on them and clean them with a 50-50 mixture of denatured alcohol and water, and then refresh the stain with a little bit of gel stain. I'm gonna use General Finishes Nutmeg. This color is a nice warm brown, and I like this gel stain. It's really thick, so it kind of stays where you put it, and it does a good job at filling in any kind of scratches or anything. I'm just going to use a lint-free cloth to apply it and then wipe it back. Next, I'm going to seal the wood with this clear shellac spray. This is going to do a couple of things. First, like I said, it's going to seal the wood, but also it's going to bring out the color and the depth in the wood grain. And I want that now because I'm going to use a flat top coat on this for a nice sort of matte modern look, but this will help to bring out the color and grain that will be preserved once I do top it with the matte finish. I'm going to apply the shellac across all of the pieces and then do a quick scuff sand and a second coat before sealing with the polyurethane. This dries really quickly, so this is sped up a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of show you how quickly this dries, and then you can move on. While that dries, I'm going to address this loose drawer glide. So I have this little drill attachment that allows me to get into really tight spaces, and I'm just going to get in here with a screw and reattach it. Still seems to be a little bit of an issue with the fit, so I'm just gonna adjust this a little bit by moving it over slightly to see if that helps. And that seemed to do the trick. While sanding, I did hit some of these brass accents with my sander and it took off that brass color. So I am going to just spray these with a little bit of a brassy gold spray paint to cover that up. Next, I'm going to reattach the base and the legs. Before I reattach the legs, I want to just check out which ones kind of look like they go together, which sides are the best to put in the front, and then I'll put the others in the back. Next, I will be tackling the edge banding. So I got a roll of walnut edge banding from Amazon. It is pre-glued, and so you just use a hot, no steam iron to apply pressure, and that melts the glue to adhere the veneer. I'm also going to use this edge banding to replace this missing piece of veneer. So first, what I want to do is just get a nice squared off edge so that it's easier to replace. And then I will place a piece of painter's tape and trace the outline of the missing veneer. Once I have that, I will apply the tape to a piece of the edge banding and then cut out the shape that I traced. Next, I will place the piece into the missing area and use the iron to adhere it the same way as I did for the edge banding on the top. Next, I'll just do a quick sand with 180, and I will get along the edges as well, just to sort of smooth those out, but also kind of curve them and help join them in with the surrounding pieces. Here I'm just applying the shellac like I did with the rest of the dresser, but on this piece I'm just gonna use a little brush to apply it. Next, I'm just gonna do a quick scuff sand on everything and then do a second coat of shellac. And with the magic of television, the second coat is complete. And as you can see, Flips never tend to go the way you think they will, and here's just yet another mishap on this one. All right, so I'm gonna apply this clear ultra matte polyurethane to the entire piece. I'm just gonna spray on a couple of layers and do a few extra on the top. When I attempted to clean the hardware, I ended up realizing that the brass color was just coming right off till a sort of silver color underneath. And so to match the other brass accents on the dresser, I'm just gonna go ahead and spray these again with the same spray paint. In between coats of polyurethane, I am gonna do a light scuff sand and then reapply. Once dried, I'm going over everything with a piece of paper bag for a nice buttery finish. Now it's time to put on the finishing touches with reattaching hardware, nourishing the drawers with some Howard's feed-in wax, and then lining a couple of the drawers. Before putting in the drawer liners, I'm just going to make sure they're nice and clean. And then I will measure the length and width before cutting out the paper to size. Lining drawers is my least favorite part of this process. If I can get this off of here. Okay. So I have it cut to size, and then I'm just going to remove some of the backing and try and line this up onto one of the straight edges as best as I can, and then hopefully I will be able to lay this out straight and flat. Luckily this time went well, and then I'll just trim any excess. Before the final reveal, let's take a look back at where we started. Overall, great shape, just had a few missing pieces of veneer, and the finish needed to be stripped back and refreshed. So after all that, here's the after. There were a couple of bumps along the way, but I think it turned out really well. I am really liking this matte finish. My repairs, they're not perfect, but I think that they blend in enough, and this is a vintage piece. So, it's got a couple flaws, but overall, it's really pretty, and I'm super happy with it. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your support. And if you're not subscribed already and you enjoy this content, please consider doing so. Hope to see you next time. Bye.